Well, hey there, it's Liz Rohr from Real World NP. You are watching NP Practice Made Simple, the weekly videos to help save you time, frustration, and help you learn faster so you can take the best care of your patients. In this week's video, it's an interview, a very special interview with a dear friend of mine, Jackie Kindall. She is a leadership and executive coach, and she works with leaders in all sorts of spaces, has over 25 years of experience, and she's answering questions today that were submitted from the NPs in the community to ask specifically about leadership questions related to becoming a nurse practitioner. The main areas we focused on were about starting off as a nurse practitioner, pearls, pitfalls, and guidance about delegation. The other part was about supervising staff that are not your direct reports and how to effectively do that, how to communicate clearly, how to set expectations, and how to give feedback, especially when it's uncomfortable. We also talked about the steps to take if things are not working well, and the proactive things we can do to keep them running smoothly. So I really hope you enjoy this interview. I had so much fun, and Jackie is such a wealth of knowledge. But yeah, without further ado, here's my interview with Jackie. Awesome. Well, welcome, Jackie. Do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Liz. My name is Jackie Kindall, and I am in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, as of 3 months ago. I do executive coaching. I work with leaders, emerging leaders, people who are aspiring to be leaders, all the way up to CEOs, helping them become more effective at leading every day. And I also do a lot of consulting, diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. And all of these things together are really aimed to create a culture that is inclusive, where everyone has an opportunity to be their best self. So I'm happy to be here today with you talking about leadership, which is my number one passion.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, Jackie, I'm so excited.
Me too.
There are so many things we could talk about. I think the context of the main struggle that new nurse practitioners have, I guess there's, like we talked about before, like there's three kind of like main things that people struggle
Mm-hmm.
with. So I think the context is that new nurse practitioners, when they graduate, potentially have worked as a nurse in the hospital before or not. And so they might have some delegation experience, but they might not. And so it's like so much of our schooling is focused on the clinical aspects, but then in the real world, we have to be managing people in a way that we didn't always expect or be prepared for,
Mm-hmm.
which includes a lot of delegation, to like stepping outside of the role that is comfortable as a nurse and stepping into a new role of leadership, which is very uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
and ownership over like the things that you need to delegate to other people to do your job effectively. And I think the main thing that people do is hold on to jobs because they can just do it themselves. And yeah, let's talk about that. So I think the person, like, I guess, like from the question being like from the context of a new provider, what are the main pearls, advice, guidance you have for people stepping into that new leadership role in that context?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is you're not alone. I mean, I can tell you the over hundreds of leaders that I've worked with, that is always an issue when you first become a leader after being an individual contributor or someone that didn't manage people, is delegation. Some people either don't delegate, they hold on to those things because they're comfortable and they make them feel like, oh, I know how to do this. So at least I'm going to be, because you don't know how to lead when you
Yeah.
first begin to lead. So you have these technical skills and you want to hold on to them. I think
Yeah.
it's like that comfort blanket. That's what I
Oh,
think.
yeah.
So I think, we want to normalize the fact that delegation is very difficult. And there's that other piece where some of the things that you need to delegate, you want to keep because they keep you sort of feeling like you're contributing. So one of the things that I want to say also is the most important thing about delegating is being really clear on the expectations. So a lot of times what I see is there's assumptions. So I'm giving this to you, and the assumption is you know what to do, and it's
Mm.
one thing. You know what to do, and therefore I'm not going to intervene. I hear a lot of new leaders saying, I don't want to micromanage. They know how to do it, so I just give it to them. And then when it starts to go downhill and what they're doing doesn't align with expectations, then there's ooh, it's not working. What do I do? And a lot of times they say, oh, let me just take it back and do it myself. Not realizing that then you've signaled to the person that you delegated to that they've failed. So that creates a host of other issues, conflict, people being demoralized, disempowerment. And so we must be clear when we delegate, like, what are the expectations? We have to over communicate. We need to be sure that we're delegating to someone that has a capability of learning to do the thing that we're delegating, right? So I'm not going to delegate something and set someone up for failure. If they've never done it, that's fine. Delegation is a way to help people grow, but you have to be there to support them as they learn. So being clear about what it is, being clear about how you're going to measure success. So that's the other thing. A lot of times we're not clear about what good looks like when we delegate, because again, we're assuming that they should know what good looks like.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, right?
This is so resonant.
It's like ding, ding, ding.
And like for so many new NPs I talked to too, like they like so resonant. But yeah, go ahead.
Right. I mean, we were good at it. So I think a lot of times sometimes we just really want that other person to be good at it too, like we were, and we assume that they are. We give them the benefit of the doubt. And for the person that you're delegating to, if you've not been clear about what good looks like, they're assuming, and they don't want to come and tell you that they're stuck, because then that says something about them. I want to make sure that they know that delegating this to me was a good thing, if it's something they wanted to learn how to do. And so it's just this lack of communication. And oftentimes what happens is the end result doesn't meet expectations. And now you have to deal with giving performance feedback, which is also something that new managers that I've worked with typically are really hesitant to do, right? Because
Really?
it feels punitive, and I don't want to have that conversation. I don't like conflict, and we could talk about that as well. So I think, to sum up what I just said about delegation, it's really important to be clear about expectations, to be there with the person. What I suggest for leaders is to say, we're going to check in 2 days, right? And I'm going to check in and see what support you need, how it's going. It's okay to say you're stuck, or it's okay to come and ask me questions in between. Like, just making it open and okay that if they're learning something new, you're there and it's okay to ask questions. Yeah. Creating that, I think of it like a SMART goal, like, creating those. What are the measurements? When are we going to check in? What's the time? What's the deadline? Ooh, what's the deadline? Because that's another one. Sometimes we don't tell people when we want it to be done.
Yeah.
Right?
We make a lot of assumptions. We make a lot of assumptions.
Time.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, I think that it's like, I've been an NP for about 6 years, and then I was a nurse for 6 years, 5 or 6 years before that. And I still am learning this. Like, I'm still not great at this. And even just you saying that, like, I'm much better now at communicating what I want, but I'm not always clear about the success piece and that time piece. Like, those are a lot of specifics that I think that we're assuming, and we don't think about. And I think you're right. Like, I think when I hear about it from nurse practitioners, it's like this assumption of they're already good at it, or they're micromanaging, or I'll just do it myself, because they're so used to coming from this team environment where it's like we all pitch in and it means that we're a team player, when in fact, like, you giving something to somebody else and empowering them to do so is a lot different. And I love what you said about when you just do it yourself, it communicates to them that they didn't do a good job. It potentially communicates a lot of negative things to them. And I think that we discount that sometimes when we're taking all the things ourselves. But like, that is so core to to team formation, right?
Absolutely. And I think if we were to sum it down to one word, it's communication. Like
Yeah.
we have to be in frequent communication, and we have to check in, and we have to say,
Mhm.
how's it going? We have to say, you know, what can I do to support you? How confident do you feel in doing this? What resources might you need? Well, there just needs to be a lot of communication, and
Mhm.
we have to manage ourselves as well so that we're not swooping in and taking over. So there's this balance with, you don't want to be a micromanager and every day come and check in, because that drives people nuts. But you also don't want to like drop it off and abandon them. So
Mhm.
setting those expectations in advance of when we're going to check in and how, so that when you do check in based on when you said you would, the person's not assuming they don't trust me, they're micromanaging me.
Yes.
Here they come again. Here comes Liz asking me again. No, we've
Oh my God,
already,
she's
we've
so annoying.
already, right. We've already created those expectations and, the boundaries, and, if this happens, come to me. Um, you kind of baked in at the very beginning, and you're continuing to follow up. So that's
Yeah.
that's the best recipe that I know for effective delegation.
And like, do you
Starting
have,
with doing it.
yeah. And do you have a sense, I think for me, one of the things I struggle with is like that I definitely struggle with that micromanagement piece. And like I never want to, and I work on the way that I communicate such that is always coming from a place of kindness and curiosity. But I also worry about
Mhm.
like, I don't know, like being condescending or something, like over explaining something that's obvious to somebody, and being
Mm.
insulting. And maybe that's just a me thing. like, like, do you
Yeah.
have any, is there a line for you? Is there like a rule of thumb when it comes to communication in terms of like, how would you know if you're over communicating? Or is that not even a problem? Is it just fine to assume that, oh, like you have a lot more of a barrier with over communication than you think?
I think that when it comes to delegating, there's really no such thing as over communication. I
Yeah.
think that we can signal, I'm going to explain it to you thoroughly.
Yeah.
My intent in doing so is to make sure that I don't assume, that you know how to do this. I want to make sure that I'm really clear. So
Mm.
I'm gonna go through the whole thing. Some of this you may already know, which is great. You may have questions, which is also great, but I'm gonna give you the whole detail. And
Mm.
so just having that conversation up front so that you then have been really clear about what your intent
Yes.
is in sharing all the stuff,
Yeah.
all the details, so they don't think, well, what she think, I'm stupid? No, no, I'm just making sure we're really clear. This is
Yeah.
all about clarity. And I know when this was delegated to me, I would have appreciated having all these details. And so that's really what it
Mm.
is.
Yeah.
And I think we got to get into the mindset of why it's important to delegate in the first place. So I
Mm.
also see that people feel, I don't want to. I talked to a new leader about a month ago, and she said, I don't want to delegate because the things that I need to delegate aren't fun. And I don't
Mm.
want them to think I'm just giving them the grunt work. And so I'm just doing it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the impact of you doing it yourself? Then you're not getting the strategic work done that you're being paid to do and you're expected to do. And so, how did you learn how to do the job you're in? Well,
Mm.
those things were foundational.
Yeah.
Okay, so don't rob your employees of the foundational things that will help them grow. And that's what delegation is, it's
Mm.
helping people grow and learn.
I love that. I love that so
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
That's so awesome. But yeah, I just love how like you're even just explicitly saying like I'm saying this because X, Y, and Z. Like just
yeah.
that level of transparency is like I don't know. That's just like, it's like, why would that not occur to me? I don't know. I just like, I don't think I've ever been that explicit in terms of like, hey, I'm explaining this to you because,
Hmm.
like that kind of thing. But that actually brings me, and I think the reason that's on my mind, and it kind of brings us to the other part of it, is that there, one of the things that I struggled with as a new grad was that I came in as a brand new nurse practitioner. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything about leadership. And I started working with a medical assistant who was technically like, I was supervising her in air quotations because she wasn't my direct report, but I was on the hook to influence slash supervise her. I don't know what the term is there. And then you have the other kind of like dynamics of like, she's been there for 10 years. She's significantly older than I am, and she doesn't love her job.
Mm.
And she's like always mad at me. Like, anyway, that's like interpersonal conflict. But like, I guess the thing that the reason that's another potential reason that is difficult to delegate is because you have potentially some either interpersonal conflicts or performance feedback type of situations or defensiveness from the people that you're trying to supervise, but then you're also not their direct supervisor. So this is like a very layered question because there's so many parts. But like, yeah, because then I think then like another question that springs out of that is like, so how do you do that when you're not a direct report? They're not your direct report. What are the steps to mitigate that? And like, maybe that's a whole another topic, but yeah, what are your thoughts just about, I guess setting expectations going into performance feedback, like if you have pearls about that or advice or guidance about that, and then the interpersonal conflict piece, perhaps.
Sure. So I'll start with, the needing to manage people who don't report to you directly. So that's difficult for new managers and people who've managed for a while. I think the most important thing to starting the relationship is for the person that they report to directly. So whoever their solid line manager is, to say to them that you're also going to report to Liz on a dotted line. So in corporate, they have the solid line and dotted line. What it means is both people, you report to both people, right? This person's writing your performance review, and this person's directly responsible for your performance, but this person also is in the mix.
Yeah.
So for the person that the medical assistant reports to directly, signal that you're also going to be, reporting to Liz, and she's responsible for managing these aspects. So that sets you up for success. So the person is not thinking, well, I don't have to answer to you, right? You're not the boss of me. So yeah,
I could tell you some horror stories, Jackie.
I have experienced some myself. And it's even challenging, when you're having to influence peers as well. So to me, I think getting, I keep going back to it, but getting clarity at the very beginning about what your role is as it relates to them and what their role is as it relates to you, and the expectations. Starting with those expectations is really important. And I think the other thing is developing the relationship. A lot of times when we have these conflicts, it stems from like, I've assumed your intent, you've assumed mine. And when we assume, it's usually nothing empowering, right? Like our brains have that negativity bias where we just, if we don't have the information, we're filling in the gaps, and it's with something that's not helpful. And so the more I know you, Liz, you could walk in and say something crazy, and I'm like, well, I know Liz, she must be having a bad day. Like, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to give you grace because I know you. And so what a lot of new managers do is put on their manager cap, and now I'm in this role, and I'm not going to, you have to develop those relationships. I don't mean, going to happy hour every Friday with the person or whatever, but creating a professional relationship so you know what their goals are and what they need and where they want to go, and you're having a conversation about that, and they know what your expectations are, and letting them in a little bit into your heart and who you are as a human. So creating that human to human connection, so that when you have to give feedback, they know it's coming from a good place,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so making sure that they understand what your role is as it relates to them is key. And then making sure that you're developing a relationship. And when there is conflict, you have the same approach. Like, I need to have a conversation with you. And the purpose of the conversation is, there are some things that I see that you're doing that could result in you not being successful. And my role and my responsibility is to make sure that you're successful. And so I want to have this conversation with you. And that's it. It's clarifying your intent up front again about why you want to have the conversation, and then being very specific about the behaviors, what you noticed, what they did, what they didn't do, the impact. So the Center for Creative Leadership has a feedback model, and it's S as in Sam, B as in boy, I, right? So it's, what was the situation? Like yesterday when we had the conversation, what was the behavior? You said X, Y, and Z, or you did X, Y, and Z, or you didn't do X, Y, and Z. And here's the impact. So when you did or didn't do X, Y, and Z, this is the impact. This is what happened. A lot of times if we just follow that, it makes it harder for the person to be defensive, because we've not described how we interpret the behavior, right? We've said you did X, Y, and Z, or you said X, Y, and Z. Now, sometimes people will say, no, I didn't. Well, yes, you did. But a lot of times if you're being really specific about what you witnessed or what they said, or, here were the expectations for how you do this thing. And, here's, what I'm seeing, and being specific and having examples. Here's the impact. And, they added in intent. So, tell me about your intent in doing it that way as opposed to this way. And then just having a conversation. And then being clear about, in the future, here's what needs to happen. What can I do to support you in doing it this way, or in getting this done, or whatever the change is that you're asking for.
Oh
Does that
gosh,
make
I love
sense?
that so much, because it's like so clear and it's so matter of fact and flat. And it also is still very human centered, where like to just the comment about like, I want you to be successful. Like, wow, that's such a different feel than most
Right. I mean,
feedback that I ever see or have
gonna get mad
experienced.
at who's gonna get mad at that?
Totally.
You
And
know?
also the curiosity, the like if we can just keep in mind, we're going to automatically assume the worst, and like, can we automatically catch that, reframe it into curiosity? And then also, like, I love algorithms and like frameworks to use, because it's just like a cheat code, where it's like SBI. Okay, I can remember that. Here's the impact, and tell me more about that, because every single time I've asked that, there's more information that you would never know. And I've had situations, either as a nurse or a nurse practitioner, where I was given feedback from a kind of caring, supportive, curious place, and then in a presumptive, why did you do this? You did this wrong. And it was like, oh, well, here's like the whole other backstory, and actually this was the best option. And it's like, oh, okay, and it lands so differently for the person you're giving feedback to. And it helps with culture of the clinic. And I think that's like one of the kind of last points I wanted to touch on. There's like so much we could talk about, but
I know.
we leave it here for now. But I guess when it comes to, so the situation I see so often, unfortunately, is that there's understaffing to start with. And then there's a lot of issues, but I'll just touch on them, and then you can pick which ones you want to talk about. But so we're understaffed. We're trying to hire, for example, a medical assistant. I'm primarily focusing on medical assistant and NP relationship, because that's the main kind of like delegation leadership role. There's also nurses too, but in terms of the delegation roles. But specifically for that, we're understaffed, we're struggling to hire somebody, we hire somebody, there isn't a great onboarding process, they are overworked and underpaid, and then there's some behavior issues and there's no supervision. Like there's like so many facets of things potentially that could go wrong that I see going wrong. And I think the unfortunate thing that I see over and over again is that somebody has either underperforming or has some behavioral issues. And please tell me if there's like a better way to phrase behavioral issues, because that feels like not human centered to say, but like there's some challenges and this person has been kind of shifted around to all the different providers, and then the new NP gets like stuck with a bad situation and they just have to handle it.
Yeah.
So that's like a whole mix of all the things we've talked about so far. But if you have any advice about that, like I recently talked with a mentee who had a medical assistant specifically practicing outside of her scope. So that's a lot more clear, where it's like you're trying to do the job of a nurse or a nurse practitioner, and that's clearly not your role, responsibility.
Right.
It's dangerous for patients. But then the other kind of like softer version is it's just kind of like a bullying problematic experience in the workplace. So it sounds like a word vomit, but any comments you want to add or advice or guidance about that? It's a really common, unfortunate situation.
Gosh, it's not uncommon even in corporate. Instead of having the bold and courageous conversation and dealing with the performance problem, and that's just what I would say is a performance problem or performance issue or non-performance. Instead of dealing with it, shuffling the person to another department.
Yes.
And the problem with that is, they're never given the opportunity to self-correct if they're shifted to the next place. And the other problem is, I think a lot of times leaders underestimate the impact that failing to deal with non-performance has on the people who are performing. If I'm coming and I'm giving it my all and I'm invested and, my manager is, giving me, accolades and recognition, but this other person is here either treating me poorly or being abusive or bullying, even the patients, just not performing, over time that erodes my motivation. It can erode my motivation to show up and play full out, because, well, this other person's still here and they're still getting all the same benefits that I'm getting, and I'm giving all this extra effort. It's sort of like when you have, you get a basket of berries and you have that one berry that's got all moldy, and then how that molds all the berries.
The whole thing.
Yeah,
totally.
Take that moldy berry out of the basket. And so, not to sound cruel, but I believe giving people clear feedback and making sure they understand the expectations, giving them the support they need to meet the expectations. And if they can't or they don't want to, because sometimes it's a skill and sometimes it's a will, like a willingness.
Yeah.
If you want to, you have to part ways. I mean, you don't want to get to that point, but sometimes it's not a good fit. Sometimes it's just not going to work. As long as you, as the leader, have given, every opportunity to connect with that person on a human level, understand what their challenges are, have those conversations, and give them the opportunity and support they need. If you've done that and it's still not working, you're doing everyone, including that person, a disservice. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have said, like, being fired from a job was the best thing that ever happened to them. Like, it sounds crazy, but no one wants to show up to work and fail. And when people are failing, they generally know it's not working in their bones. And sometimes even just having that conversation to say, this, like, we tried all these things, this is not working. Like, what is it that you, what else do you need? Or do you feel like this is the right role for you? Like, let's have a conversation about it, like human to human.
Mm-hmm.
To your point earlier, sometimes just opening that window allows for such a rich conversation. And it doesn't always end well, right? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people are mad, and they're sometimes they even sue, right,
Yeah.
for wrongful
Mm-hmm.
termination, and that's the most unfortunate reality of being in a leadership role. Is it's not always going to work out well, but you
Mm-hmm.
cannot just ignore it, because that's not going to work out well either. And
Yeah.
please don't pass your burden on to another nurse practitioner, because that's just unfair to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the unfortunate situation that I hear about so often is that, I mean, I directly had that experience as a new grad. It was like, I'm sorry, Liz, you just have to put up with this for
Hmm.
now. And I wasn't privy to the whole situation,
Yeah.
the person who's actually directly supervising them, but yeah, it was really challenging. But I feel like in terms of like going backwards in my own experience and imparting, like hopefully people like watching this can take all of these things and like start implementing them. I can hear already how scared they are to like have
Yeah.
those conversations. But I feel like I don't know. I feel like I guess some another kind of framework that I usually recommend, and I welcome your feedback about this, is like it sounds like, especially with your advice, is like so if you're not directly supervising them, having a conversation with the person who is directly supervising them, which is usually the office manager, talking
Hmm.
about that, what that looks like, just being very plain and candid about it
Yeah.
before any quote unquote problems happen,
Yeah.
and then having honest, direct conversations with the people setting expectations. And then, like you said, that SBI kind of framework for feedback. And then I think like the other part is that when things are not going well, to speak up. Because I think it's that
Hmm.
same stuffing thing of like, oh, I'll just do it. I'll just do all the
Yep.
jobs. I don't want to complain. I'm lucky. I hear this all the time. I'm lucky to have this job. I'll put up with anything for a year so I can get experience, and
Yeah.
then I can get more kind of like leverage for a new job. But I guess like the general recommendation that I have is using what you've already talked about, like putting things in writing and
Mm.
sending them to the right people. And I don't know if you have any feedback about that particular process, but I always tell new NPs, and I learned this on the job, is that basically if you don't document it in HR context, it didn't happen. I don't know if that's true,
Yeah.
but we always say that in nursing, is that if you didn't
No,
document it, it didn't happen legally speaking. But
right. It's true. It's true. So that's a whole other lane. So if there are performance issues, and you're having, performance conversations and expectation conversations, it is important to take notes as a supervisor. And at a certain point, if you get to the point where you're having to give, like, in the traditional progressive discipline process, you're having to give a verbal warning. We've had these coaching conversations,
mm-mm.
and I'm still seeing the same performance issues.
Yeah.
So, at this point, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then this could lead to termination of your employment. Like, that's the
Mm-hmm.
verbal warning, and then you have to document that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes some
Mm-hmm.
supervisors will send an email to the person as a reminder. Others just, you gave the verbal warning, you take your notes about it, and then you send it to HR, or I guess in this case, the office manager.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if you all do like written warnings
Oh
where,
yeah, no, for sure.
okay,
And I
so,
think in terms of the traditional HR process, that usually is what happens. I think that
okay,
like it's more of a tangential, you're contributing to the situation, but you are not the person giving the verbal or written warnings.
okay,
You're just kind of passing that along to the office manager and to your supervisor
okay, got it.
so that they can
Yeah,
take
I
the
mean,
actions. But yeah.
you're right. You have to document. So what I was talking about earlier is really more leading up to that, like the coaching
Yeah.
conversations that you're having, and the
Mhm.
clarity that you're
Yeah.
giving, and the feedback and all of that. But if it's a pervasive issue,
Yeah.
then yes, wow, you do have to document, and all that fun.
Yeah, I know.
All
You used
that
to work in
fun.
HR. Jackie used to work in being head of HR, so.
Oh, for you, I mean, 25 years or so. I think, yeah, 25 years or so I was in human resources. And so 5 years ago, I left to start my own practice. And, in HR, I was over all the disciplines. So the employee relations, which is this part, the learning and development, which was always my favorite part. And that's, the lane that I'm in now. But yeah, those are the, not so
Not
fun
fun part.
parts of HR. But I really see like a leader's role as coaching and helping the employee grow. And
Yes.
so I tell a lot of the leaders that I work with, this desire to shrink away, or this habit of shrinking away from feedback, happens at all levels. Right? So I like to think about it. If you're coaching, do you watch sports?
Not really, sort of.
Okay. All right. So
I like
let's just
playing
pick.
sports. So I like soccer and yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's soccer. So say you were the soccer coach, and you start the season, and you see people are understand you're clear about the expectations, and you see one of the players doing something, and if they did it slightly differently, then they would have more results. But you wait until the end of the season and you say, here's what I saw over this last season, and now I need to put that in your performance review. Do better next year. Like, you would never do that, but that's what we do at work.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
people get that performance review and they're like, what? I didn't.
Where did this come from? Yeah.
It's a surprise. I never knew. No one talked to me. And if someone would have talked to me 8 months ago, perhaps, I would have been more successful, and then the team would have been more successful.
Yeah.
So you're giving that feedback so the team can win, so they can win. Like, thinking about yourself as a coach from that perspective.
And I love that. And I love that, like, just like your general positivity. And I think I'm like noticing as I'm asking these questions and presenting these situations that I have a lot of frustration because I've seen it for so long. And like, really, like, the ideal worlds we're trying to build are like exactly what you're talking about. And I think so often we all get really frustrated with the issues that we're having. And it's like hard to remember that, like, what is the purpose here? What is the point? The point is that we're all going to succeed and we're all going to do well. And I think I know that at a deep level, and other NPs know that, but I think sometimes when we zoom into like the issues that are in front of us, it's hard to remember that aspect of like, we're coming at this from a human to human success, supporting everyone's growth and development and learning and all of that stuff. And it's
absolutely, like, having those real honest conversations with this other human being. And I also think the more people know, we can't have this conversation without talking about empathy, right?
Yes.
So the more people know that you are invested in them as human beings, and that you care about them, and that your empathy is at that level where you're taking action to make sure that they succeed, the more we're able to establish that connection, the easier it is to have these conversations, and the more people will do their best work. Right? If I've worked for leaders who were empathetic and who cared about me as a human being, and there wasn't anything that I wouldn't do or try to do. When we are in these situations, and we know there are a lot of leaders out there that shouldn't be in leadership roles, right? I mean, it's not for everybody. And so when we're working for a leader who only cares about our productivity, who only cares about the bottom line at whatever cost, it's some people are okay in that environment, and then there are some people who they're not going to do their best work, because what's the motivation? I'm just a widget to you. And so that empathy is really critical.
Yeah. And I think that's like another thing that I hear a lot about in terms of NPs going into jobs like that. And I think like my general advice for people in that situation is like, I don't know. I think I just like the cautioning against, like, I don't know, just like be careful with that, right? Because it's like, I think people can be so hopeful that things will change and like I can put up with anything. And it's like also like you need to take care of yourself and like not
Mm,
like if you are doing the steps, if you're following the framework, if you're giving feedback, if you're reaching out to your supervisor, your colleagues, all of that stuff, and it's still not changing, or they're like, well, that's just how it is. Like, ding, 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 you have your answer. And
yeah.
like, can you live with that or can you not live with that? Like, can you continue to show up to a job where that is the answer? Like, as if you're just going to hope that it changes. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that there's this like false hope situation of like
Yeah.
people thinking things are going to change. And it's like, you've followed the steps and you've seen the patterns and you've seen the objective data. And here's where we are. And if you can have,
Hmm.
again, another explicit conversation. I'm like, listen, I'm really concerned about this. Maybe not listen.
Right.
Like, hey, supervisor, I'm really concerned. What are
Yeah.
we going to do about this issue where we've communicated feedback and it's not resolving and it's impacting me in this way? Like, and then you get your answer, I guess. I don't know. I guess that's like there's so many things that I want to like tell all the NPs about. But that's like
Right.
certainly one in terms of dysfunctional workplaces. Like it's important to, I don't know. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that in terms of like if things can change or if they don't, or if it's, like where to call it, I guess.
Mm, where to call it? It's such a personal choice.
Yeah.
I think not like I really believe we all deserve to be content at work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if work is causing stress to the point where you're noticing, that dread of the morning and the stomach aches and all of the, unfortunately, many of us have been in those situations where we have like physical responses to
Hmm.
being in a situation that is just unhealthy for us.
Yeah.
It's not personally for me, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Like
No.
I would, my hope is that we all find that culture that allows us to like be the best versions of ourselves, and we find that
Mhm.
fulfillment. Like it's a blessing and a privilege to do work that I would like for me that I would do for free if I could somebody else to pay my bills. And so creating that culture and being in a culture where there is joy, not all the time, that's not realistic, but
Yeah.
most of the time it's joy and fulfillment and growth and connection. We don't have to put up with anything less. I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of times where people feel like, well, the grass isn't greener on the other side, right? Like
Yeah.
this is the situation that I know, and if I
Yeah.
leave, what if it's the same? Like
Or
we could,
worse. Yeah.
or
At least
worse,
I know that
right?
it's fine here.
Yeah,
I can tolerate this. Yeah.
yeah.
Or
And
I
we,
think alternatively too, like so many NPs, they just have such big hearts and like
yeah,
they want to change the culture. They want to make an impact and not leave because
right,
leaving means that they're giving up or something.
yeah.
And it's like, and I think, I don't know, I guess like, maybe last question, like, do you feel like they're like, what are your thoughts about when it comes to building a culture? Like, if there's a really unhealthy work culture in terms of the influence that one nurse practitioner has, or even a group of nurse practitioners, like, what is your thought about that in those in the settings that you've worked in terms of like top down versus bottom up, like that kind of thing?
Hmm. So before I answer that, I do want to say that working to change a culture is really good,
Hmm.
right? And if you find that your efforts have not materialized and it's too much for you and you need to go, then
Mm,
that's not failure. Like as long as you know you've tried your best
yeah.
to make a change and an impact, right? So culture change takes a long time. And I think that's the thing that people underestimate is how much effort and how much work. Because as
Mm,
cultures have evolved over time, and it takes a lot of intentionality, a lot of tough
mm,
decisions, a lot of rough conversations,
mm,
and a lot of stamina
mhm.
to change a culture.
Yeah.
And it won't change if everybody's not aligned,
Yeah.
right? And so, um, yes, cultures can change from the bottom up, if if they're empowered, right,
Yeah.
to do that. I work with one organization where they have employee resource groups, and employee resource groups are just working so hard to get the attention of senior leaders.
Yeah.
And over time, as the senior leaders are listening to the feedback, and they're hearing and they're saying, "Oh, okay, yes, wait a minute, this is something we need to pay attention to as well." So it can work, um, but it's really hard if the leader or the person at the top is not aligned with the culture change,
Yeah.
because they're the ones that um, I really believe, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, but there's a John Maxwell saying about, everything rises and falls, in leadership. That's not the exact quote because I can't remember it right now, but yeah, that's really where it starts. And
Mm.
so getting that alignment with the leader around what culture we want to create, and then giving employees the opportunity to buy in and be part of that culture change process, being really intentional about what we're trying to create. What does it look like? What does it not? What behaviors support this culture? What behaviors don't? And what are the rewards for supporting the culture? And what are the um, consequences for showing up in a way that's not aligned with our culture?
Mm. Mm.
And being willing to tell people that aren't aligned with this culture that maybe this isn't the place for you. Um,
Mm.
I remember, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago with Netflix. Um, if you want to like learn about culture change, look up Netflix, because they did a lot of work. I think it was about 10 years ago.
Mm.
They actually went through this whole process of articulating what the culture is, and giving people the opportunity to opt out if they
Mm.
didn't want to, they
Mm.
didn't want to, they weren't about that.
Yeah.
So culture
Yeah.
is important. Everything, I think everything, I don't think there's anything more important in an organization than its culture.
I can't agree more. I mean, I think, yeah, and I think that's like I so appreciate the way that you're saying that, is that like I don't know, like it's such a bigger thing than I think a lot of us acknowledge. And I think that because so many NPs are so ambitious and so caring, they really do want to make a really big impact. And they do things like make policies and procedures where there aren't any, and doing
Mm-hmm.
feedback, and like doing all the things that they're trying to do. They're doing all the right things, but
Yeah.
there's only so much, like it is so important that we have that heart and that energy, but at the same time recognizing that there is a limit if we're not all on the same page. Because I think that
Right.
that's the unfortunate thing that I've seen a whole bunch of, like trying and trying and trying, and then it's just like butting heads, or like not, it's not coming through, or it's like not taken
Mm-hmm.
seriously, or it's not acknowledged, and it's like, okay, it's just important to, I think, to keep that in mind, because like there's so
Yeah.
much that we can do, but like there is a limit
Yeah.
too, that we have. It's like
Right.
it's the right thing to do to protect ourselves at that point if it's really not working.
Right. And you have to know it's personal choice, and you have to know when it's not working for you. And I
Yeah.
think that the thing that I would end on is change is hard,
Yeah.
right? And so the more we stay connected to our why, as it relates to why we are invested in change, the more we stay connected to that, the
Mm-hmm.
more we're able to say, okay, this is a really rough day, but here's why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just the same thing as when you start your own business,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about, why did I do this? There were those days. I remember year two, many days where I was like, okay, why did I do this again? Because right now I want to just start applying for jobs.
Burn
Okay,
it
write that.
down.
Right, write it down. Oh yeah, that's right. Applying for jobs does not align with your why. And so same thing with culture change. It takes time and it takes effort, and there will be rough days, but remembering like why you're invested in changing the culture in the first place.
Yeah.
I think that courage, I do think that there's the ability to have such a significant impact in your role as an NP, but
Mm-hmm.
you also have to know you're trying to when your efforts are futile,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying give up too soon, but I'm also saying not stay in a place for 10 years and have 9 of those years be miserable. So,
Yeah.
and that goes for any role,
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
we deserve more than that as a
Mm.
human being.
It's so true. It's so true. And it's like, it's so important for the longevity of being in, specific to nurse practitioners. Sorry for my fan.
Oh, that's
Specifically for
okay.
nurse practitioners too. Like, it's so important that we sustain this career, especially right out of the gate. And like you said, like even starting a business is different than becoming an NP, but they're very similar in some ways because it's a huge role transition, huge responsibility. And I think a lot of people can get into that place of like, why did I do this in the first place?
Hmm.
I think I should go back to my old job where I knew what I was doing.
Yes, absolutely.
There's so much.
But
Well,
but going back to why you became an MP in the first place, like what was it that energized you about that,
yeah.
and how letting that be your fuel.
Yeah. And holding on to that hope and holding on to that vision too. And like not letting that go out, because I think a lot of times, and I feel like this is probably true in the corporate setting as well, like regardless of your type of job, but it's easy to lose passion over time when you're frustrated. So it's like,
Yep.
so just like reconnecting constantly.
Yes, and I think the thing is we don't realize we are in a perpetual state of frustration, how that impacts how we show up.
Hmm.
You know,
So true.
we can't see that we're now the person stinking it up at work.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Yeah, that's the whole other side of it. So
It's so true. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. You're the
thank
best.
you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I could talk about this stuff all day. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Where can people find you to learn more? I mean, I've talked about this with you already. I can't wait to work with you in terms of leadership training.
Thank
Um,
you.
but yeah, that's something that you're doing, right? For people in corporate settings primarily. Is that
Yes.
correct? You're doing
Yeah.
like a training for people who are, sorry, you tell us where they can
Sure.
find you and how we can learn more from you.
So they can find me either on Instagram at Kindle Evolve, Kin. People always put the E, but it's spelled like kind all.
Oh,
So
of course
right.
it is, Jackie.
That's my last name. So at kind all evolve, the word evolve on Instagram, or that's my website, kindleevolve.com. I'd love to, if anyone wants to have a chat or has additional questions. I am working with leaders all the time, and I've created a program that launches in September for new leaders, and talking about some of just some of these very same topics. So
Yeah.
that's why your request to do this was quite timely.
Yeah, totally. And I
Yeah.
think it's like applicable for new nurse practitioners, but also like there's a lot of NPs who are going into management. So even if, there are people who are not new grads in my community. And I know that is something that I considered after a couple of years of practice, leading as a medical director. And that's, yeah, a whole nother skill set. So you want to
It
pass that
is.
along to your NP colleagues if you're not going into leadership positions yet. If you haven't grabbed the ultimate resource guide for the new NP, head over to realworldnp.com/guide. You'll get these videos sent straight to your inbox every week with notes from me, patient stories, and bonuses I really just don't share anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching. Hang in there, and I'll see you soon.